Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Modern Biopharma podcast. We're excited to have Jarrod Wrampe from CRB here today as a guest. Jarrod is based out of the Midwest and, like most of us, is working from home due to COVID-19. So we're looking forward to talking to him today. How are you doing today, Jarrod?
I'm great. How are you, Jesse?
I'm doing well. I'm excited to have another interview here today with Jarrod. Jarrod's with CRB, as I said before. He has a lot of years' experience working in the biopharma industry as a project manager, a process engineer, process utility engineer, and he's based out of the Midwest. So before we get started, Jarrod, could you just tell us a little bit about who you are, where you're at, family, kids, things you like to do? I'd love to hear a little bit more about that.
Yeah. So again, my name's Jarrod. I've been at CRB for almost 19 years, and that's really where I started out of college. I graduated from Kansas State University in 2001, master's degree in architectural engineering. But I've done critical utilities or process utilities for my whole career. I've seen a lot of plants and a lot of cool things in that time. So. Got a wife and four kids and two dogs and a cat. We all are in the same house currently, except for the oldest right now, who's still at his own house at college. So it's a full house, but we're managing.
Well, that is a full house for sure. So what is the office that you work out of right now?
I'm in Kansas City office.
Okay, so Kansas City, that's one of the bigger CRB offices. Are you working all over the country, or are you more regionally based in your work?
I've been all over. For most of my career, or a good portion of my career, I spent a lot of time on the West Coast, working projects out there. But I've also, established some pretty good relationships with people in the industry, and so I actually right now I have projects, a couple projects on the East Coast and some in Texas, and I've got one in Nebraska right now, and still some on the West Coast. So I've got all the time zones covered. Yeah, I actually don't have anything in the Mountain Time Zone right now, so it makes for an interesting day for sure.
Yeah, you can spread those calls out. Have some calls in the morning at breakfast, and maybe some at dinner. So I'm interested. Have you always been in the biopharm space? I know CRB works in many different industries, certainly different offices, even work in multiple industries. So what have you done over the course of your career?
Yeah, so Ryan Schrader, who's our president, was actually my first boss at CRB. He was my core team leader, and it's a biotech core team. So that's been my entire career. I have done some stuff in pharmaceutical, which we break down into a little bit different, a smaller subset, I guess, of Biofarm. Haven't done a ton I've done a little bit of food, consulted on some food, but I haven't done a lot of that, and not a lot of labs or anything like that. So almost entirely biofarm manufacturing.
All right, so you got your start right away, right out of college. You were able to start working in this industry and all over the country. So that's a lot of great experience. So you've had 20 years, give or take, in the industry. What are some of the big things that you've seen change over the course of your career?
I mean, there's the obvious things, right? I mean, there's been a pretty large shift there in the middle of that to single-use tech, which obviously changes some things. I spent the first third of my career getting acclimated and knowing CIP systems and how to generate lots and lots and lots of water. But then, single use comes along, and I don't need to do that anymore. I need a different kind of set of skills. So I think we're moving back to a place where, that there's kind of a hybrid approach coming, that's kind of coming around. People are seeing the benefits of having some fixed tanks as well as having some single use tech. So we're kind of seeing that as
Oh, well, we cut out a little bit there, but that's okay. So this hybrid approach, I'd like to just talk a little bit more about that. So, we're seeing a lot of single-use facilities, but could you talk about where somebody might prefer a more fixed piece of equipment versus a single-use piece of equipment in designing their facility?
Let's just say we're talking about a MAB process or something like that. Single use makes a lot of sense, and maybe it's a 2,000 liter scale. But if you're producing a lot of buffers or something like that, and you need to turn that quickly, obviously you're going to have a lot of warehouse space to manage all of those bags if you were going to mix that up in single use mixers. So doing that in a fixed tank and then dispensing into bags, that is an approach that is cleaning buffers that are made up of salts and alcohol and that sort of thing is not very rigorous and not super water intensive. So it's something that's at least entertained as a possibility.
That's great. So you do a lot with utilities in your role. Do you see much emphasis on the idea of minimizing utilities, being more efficient, things like that? Or is it more process driven, quality driven, and that's really what happens, and then the utilities sort of come after that as a side benefit?
I think it's probably a little both. There is a pretty big push, and I have talked to several clients that are, they're talking about being, net zero carbon emissions, by a certain date. And so there's a big push, and water is obviously a large part of our industry. So there's a big push to reduce that consumption and reduce all the utilities that are required to generate water. So, if you look at a large plant that is a large traditional plant, everything's going to kind of pivot around, energy-wise, it's going to pivot around water for injection. So as far as a major energy consumer. So I think, people also see the move to single use as the ability to not have a bunch of stainless tubing. So therefore, if there's a cleaning effect, I don't have to clean it, but I also get to avoid the upfront installation cost on some of that too. Not that the single-use stuff doesn't have cost, but there's certainly some benefits, schedule and manpower-wise.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, you've seen facilities really start to go up fast, and some of this new single-use technology really makes that a little bit easier because you don't have the same kind of infrastructure involved. But I just want to move on to, you worked at a lot of facilities around the country. What's maybe a specialty that you really developed over the years working on different types of facilities?
So one of my first project at CRB was actually at a plasma fractionation plant in Los Angeles. It was originally Baxter, and that's now a Takeda site. And if you're at all familiar with how those processes work, you've got a lot of opportunity to learn a lot of different things. So obviously there's water for injection, and there's there's CIP and that sort of thing. But a lot of it also had the capability for me to learn a lot about different heat transfer, different aspects of heat transfer, and different kinds of heat transfer fluids. So I've actually kind of got the both ends of the spectrum as far as dirty critical utilities. So heat transfer fluids that maybe run through jackets or heat exchangers and that sort of thing, as well as the clean side. So that's my focus has been critical utilities for my whole career. But I would definitely say water and heat transfer are the two areas where I have the most experience.
Yeah, so fluids and heat transfer, those are both pretty big deals in a pharmaceutical plant, and really touch just about everything that's going on in a plant. So those are good specialties to have. So another question I had, and I just wanted to sort of throw it out there and see what you think, but you've been to a lot of facilities, you get to see a lot of different processes. What's something that when you go into a plant, you see a lot of places maybe not taking advantage of, an improvement that is readily available that people could move to and improve how their plant runs?
That's a really good question. The thing that's kind of, I guess I'll default to the thing that's in vogue now, or what shows up in my inbox more often than not, and that's the use of ozone and high purity water systems. We've actually been doing that for 20 years, but it's being more and more and more common. They actually have some pretty large systems that are using ozone for standardization. But I have a system that's we just built in the Northeast is actually a membrane Wi-Fi that was ozone sanitized. So from the tank distribution perspective, and it's really cool because it makes for a really energy efficient and fast system. It doesn't require a bunch of time for standardization and that sort of thing. And a lot of times we'll go in and we'll do studies that are throughput based, like how many more batches can we get in a week or whatnot. Well, if you're spending 4 hours every week sanitizing, you're not able to produce during that period, obviously you could regain that by shortening that window. So I feel like ozone's underutilized in our industry. I think it's gaining some momentum though.
So this is an interesting subject, and one that I'm also in water, so this is one I'm a little bit more familiar with than maybe some other subjects that you could talk on. But I'm really interested to understand where you're seeing the adoption of this start to happen, maybe more than other things. Like what kind of customers are willing to do this, and what's sort of catalyzing this change, and getting somebody to switch over from heat to a new technology like ozone?
I feel like the people that are willing to investigate, are willing to look at membrane, are also willing to look at ozone. It comes up almost every time when we do a membrane system, because they're like, okay, I'm going to go ahead and do this. So what's the next level that I could go to? God, honestly, there's a lot of these startup cell and gene therapy plants, and specifically gene therapy plants that are cutting edge and data based, and look at it objectively rather than having a bunch of history or dogma that's holding them back. So those are the ones that seem to be willfully adopting it quickly. So we've actually got a few plants we're doing with that method, that are anywhere from West Coast to East Coast.
Yeah, and a lot of those newer plants, they don't really have the same kind of playbook that some of the more traditional plants had, right? So they're maybe a little bit more willing to try out some new things that wouldn't have happened otherwise. So what are some of these risk factors that these customers are looking at, worried about when they are looking to make a decision to switch to something like ozone?
Not at all. I mean, the primary risk that everyone's concerned about is operator exposure. And what I normally tell people is, we want to do this. If you look at it like a hot Wi-Fi system, you would want to set the temperature in a way that is the most energy efficient, but also does what it's intended to do. So same thing goes for ozone. I would want to set that concentration as low as possible, but that also does what it's intended to do while thinking about personnel hazards and that sort of thing. So, you can put a lot of controls, and that's sort of like not a lot of controls. You can put some controls in place to mitigate those factors, but generally speaking, it's not as risky as many people believe, especially at the low doses that that are going to be necessary for our systems.
Well, that's great. So moving on, I just wanted to ask, what's something that you're excited about? You've been in the industry for a long time. So what's that thing that gets your engineering juices flowing right now?
Well, currently there's a lot of COVID stuff going on, so that's really I've got a handful on my plate right now of people working on different therapies and vaccines and whatnot that are in a real hurry. So I've been really busy here the last few weeks, and it's a cool place to be. I mean, that's the exciting part, is to get to have something that can make such a global impact, and have that be your everyday job. So that's the thing that usually gets me pretty excited. The other thing is, I mentioned cell and gene therapy. I mean, we start talking about those, and we use the word cure in the sentence. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, cure. That is a word we don't actually use a lot in our industry. It's more therapy or medication or something, but that's a big one. Well, right now, obviously, big COVID is the big thing. I got to ask, have you ever experienced the amount of calls that you're probably getting right now before about one thing? I mean, you're a good guy, but are you that popular normally?
No, I've never seen any. I mean, nobody has.
Yeah.
Not many
Well,
people that are alive have seen anything like this.
Your job, right?
Yeah. That's the cool part, though, is that I'm like, I spent a lot of time working with a lot of different people on a lot of different plants, and those people move around. But I've stayed at CRB, so getting to see how people I know and know personally are really making breakthroughs and trying to get out in front of it. It's really it's cool. I'm cheering for them because I know these people.
This is going to be really interesting. I've already heard of multiple facilities starting to ramp up things like production for therapies that they're just figuring this out as they go. So the world is going to start getting a glimpse into our world in a way that they've never had before, and at the same time probably going to be seeing it being done like it's never been done before.
Yeah, it's gonna set the expectation that we can do it this fast all the time. So prepare for that.
Good luck. That's
yeah, that's gonna probably impact you a little bit more than me with your role, but that's okay. So this is another question I have, and I'm trying to ask this to a lot of my guests to just sort of get some feedback. But you got a lot of professional experience here in the Biofarm space. And I'm wondering, what would you tell yourself if you could go back 10 years? Like, what's a great piece of advice that you would give your younger self 10 years ago?
Oh, gosh. Some of these...
And it can't be a stock pick. It can't be a stock pick. That's not allowed.
I wouldn't do that anyway. Gosh, 10 years ago, that would have been 2010. What would I tell myself 10 years ago that I wish I'd known today is, don't be afraid to use stainless. There's a lot of things. there's a lot, and I'm not talking about high purity. I'm just talking about in general. There's been plenty of times that things have come up on projects where, in hindsight, we might have used stainless over carbon steel or something like that, even though may have been acceptable in the long run. It was better for the plant to look at it from that perspective, better for the manufacturer that's making the equipment. I think I figured this out in my first 10 years, but I would still tell myself 10 years ago that relationships are more important than profit. Maintaining good working relationships with people in industry is super, super important.
Yeah, that's something I think I'm going to hear a lot of with this question, and I'm glad I do, because it's where so much of this really happens. That's why we're doing this podcast, to try to connect people and help people get to know each other within the industry. So I have only one more question for you, and that's I just kind of want to have you share something. What's a final word of advice to our community, the people that you and I would interact with on a daily basis, the engineers, managers that are involved in making of these therapies and drugs that we all rely on so much?
What would I tell them? I don't want to sound like a sales pitch, but I'm here to help. I realize that everybody is fighting fires right now, and everybody is going as fast as possible. So sometimes help doesn't mean that I'm building something for you or designing something for you. Sometimes help is just, can you help me run down or give me a reference on something like that? So making use of that network, making use of those relationships. That's the thing that I would want everybody to hear, is that, our network's pretty vast. It's a small world. I run into people all the time that, I had no idea that they'd made 3 jumps and somehow we're back in the same world. But, the biopharm industry is not there's not a lot of people. There's it's a big industry, but people-wise, expertise-wise, it's pretty tightly knit community. So that's what I would want to encourage everybody to do, is that, that I'm fully confident in our industry to be able to figure this thing out quickly.
Mm-hmm.
So
I agree, Jarrod. It kind of goes back to your 10 years comments as well, and that just these relationships that we keep are just more important than we probably even realize on a regular basis. Things pop up, and maybe pride gets in the way, and we don't call when we should. But really, it's just a matter of reaching out and touching base with people and asking questions and being genuinely interested, and ultimately those conversations can really help us in so many different ways. So thanks again for today. That's all we have. And I just want to say thank you for being on, for being willing to spend this time with me and all of our listeners. And look forward to seeing you again in the future at other events, venues, and all the things that you are participating in. So have a great day.
Yeah, you too, Jesse. Thanks.